Welcome to Point Loma Nazarene University. Signed of the 2014 report card on the media, sponsored by the local chapter, San Diego chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. I'm Stephen Goforth, Assistant Professor of Journalism here at Point Loma, and we appreciate you taking the time to come here tonight. It's always good when community members come together and discuss areas of concern and interest. I'd like to turn it over now to J.W. August, who is the leads the board for the Society of Professional Journalists locally, to give us a little rundown of what the Society of Professional Journalists is all about.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. I'm the president. I'm J.W. August. I'm the president of the local chapter of the San Diego Society of Professional Journalists. Welcome. This is about our 20th year of doing this, I believe. And it gives us an opportunity to hear what it feels like to be on the other side of the lights, or the typewriter, or the computer. The SPJ is the oldest and largest journalism organization in the United States. Though many of our guests might not believe that, we do have a code of ethics that many journalists follow. And we do appreciate Point Loma Nazarene University for again allowing us to use this beautiful facility for the event. And I encourage you, if you're a journalist or going to be a journalist, consider the SPJ as an organization well worth joining. Now, for his, what year is this? 12th or 13th year of doing this, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dennis Borgino.
I was a bit frightened there for a moment. If you've ever been interviewed by JW, you know why I was frightened for a moment. Thanks, everyone. And again, this evening is about our panelists' impressions of how the media covered their story. It's not about adjudicating right or wrong in those stories. It's about talking about the coverage, talking about whether it was appropriate, whether it was fair, why was it, why wasn't it. So let's meet our panelists tonight. We'll ask them to each recount their stories and recount their treatment in the media, and then ask them to give the media a grade, because after all, this is the report card on the media, so we want them to give us a letter grade about how they were treated by the media. Nearest to me, Rachel Laing, a communications professional with a long background as a newspaper reporter and magazine writer. She worked in Mayor Jerry Sanders' communications staff, now heads her own communications consulting firm. She's here tonight because she worked on the mayoral campaign of Nathan Fletcher, who did not make the recent runoff. Full disclosure, Rachel and her husband are close personal friends of my liking, right? So I won't go light on her, I promise. Next to her, Sara Britt. Ms. Britt is the grandmother of Hannah Anderson, the Lakeside teenager kidnapped by family friend James DiMaggio after he killed her mother and 8-year-old brother in August of last year. DiMaggio was shot dead by an FBI agent in Idaho, and Hannah was rescued. But the 16-year-old girl was criticized in the media for not showing, quote, appropriate grief, smiling at funerals, and generally not behaving as the public believed a grieving teenager, quote, should behave. Sara Britt. Next to her, Matthew Tucker. Matt is the CEO of the North County Transit District. Mr. Tucker has had a long-running beef with iNewsSource and KPBS over its coverage of the district's business, alleging a reporter has a personal animosity toward him. He has demanded retractions 3 times from iNewsSource, twice over stories dealing with the Sprinters' brake rotor issues, and once over a story alleging age discrimination in hiring at the district. Matt Tucker. And finally, Laura Fink. Laura is a political consultant who served as Bob Filner's deputy campaign manager for one of his congressional re-election campaigns. Fink says Filner harassed her in 2005 during that campaign when he patted her on the behind and made a crude joke. She demanded an apology, got what she believed to be a half-hearted one, but did not make the incident public because she feared retribution from Filner. She came forward to add to the chorus of women who said they were harassed in the scandal that eventually led to Filner's resignation. Laura Fink. That's our panel. Let us start over here with Rachel Laing. Now, Rachel, you were involved in Nathan Fletcher's political campaign for mayor, and certainly there were allegations that at least one media outlet had it in for him. Can you recount your experiences?
Well, So the one media outlet that there were allegations, they were pretty blatant about it. They weren't even pretending not to have it in for him. The publisher screamed at him on the phone and told him, "I will bury you." So it wasn't an allegation, it was a fact. Whether that played out in the reporters and journalists, the actual editors and reporters' work, isn't as cut and dried, though. You know,
You're talking about the Union Tribune.
Yes, I'm talking about the Union Tribune, sorry. Doug Manchester and Nathan Fletcher had a falling out in 2012 when Nathan left the Republican Party. It was pretty public, and there was some back and forth during the 2012 primary between them that I mean, it was public, everybody knows. They said some things in the editorial board meeting that were deemed inappropriate by some. That tape was released, and since then, I mean, it was absolute animosity. It was very clear. In the editorial page, it was very obvious. They did probably, I think I counted recently, about 18 anti-Fletcher editorials during the period, during the primary campaign, which is pretty excessive. And they were mean. They were mean-spirited. It was very obvious that. But the news side is sort of the different. The news side was different, and there were pretty quality journalists covering the race. It was Lori Weisberg and Craig Gustafson, and Craig was sort of running the coverage. And then a few people were less concerned with appearing objective and less concerned with, you know, sort of making up for the publisher's animosity. But I would say that when you look at the newspaper and you have it's an institution, it has a ton of influence, it feeds all other news outlets. If nothing else, then all other news outlets are competing against it. And when you have that kind of situation, they're an important institution, and they deserve to be watchdogged, because they're just as influential, and they influence public policy just as much as any government agency. So the reluctance on the part of other media outlets to call them on it was, to me, a little bit disappointing, to be honest. I mean, I think everybody feels like we don't want to pick on the UT. Everybody's always been picking on the UT, and we don't want to do that. But and it's, you know, some will do it, some will call them on it, but a lot of folks don't want to. I know Voice of San Diego, Scott Lewis has always told me he's very averse to taking on the UT and criticizing them, so they have a very high bar for that. And I understand that. They don't want to look petty, and they don't want to look like it's just trying to take down their competition, but at the same time, here's a newspaper that has tremendous influence, that in the way that they marketed the stories, in the fact that their publisher has made it so well known about his animosity towards Nathan Fletcher. You don't think the writers know that? I mean, a writer was fired at the UT the commonly understood situation was that a columnist was fired for not backing the publisher's dream of building this, you know, glorious stadium, and not just getting behind it. So if that columnist was fired, then what message does that send to others if they're not towing the line with regard to?
What about the other media in covering that campaign? Because there was the issue of him first becoming an independent,
Mm-hmm.
then very quickly, and some would say expediently, becoming a Democrat
Mm-hmm.
to run in the race. What do you think the coverage of that, the transition was fair, or was it just solely focused on the flip-flop and not maybe the issues behind why he chose to do what he did?
Yeah, I felt like it was a little obsessive. I mean, we thought, okay, well, everybody's going to talk about this, and they should. It's totally fair to talk about it, and he addressed it, but then it was again and again, and it's like, you guys never got off of it, you know? Get off of it. I mean, it's really not as important an issue to your viewers and readers as finding out what's he want to do now, you know? And I think a lot of people felt that way. I heard a ton of feedback just about, all I keep hearing is that he switched, and that's it's an interesting story, but it went on and on and on, and I thought it was a little bit boring.
So how much of an impact do you think the obvious animosity that the publisher of the UT had toward Mr. Fletcher and the coverage of the change in party versus the issues that he was proposing in the race, how much of an influence do you think it had on him finishing third? Because he entered the race as probably the favorite.
Yeah, sure. This is grade the media, not blame the media.
Yeah.
No, I
I'm
don't.
just curious in wondering how much you all in the campaign thought the media coverage of that one issue contributed to his loss.
I have to say, a lot of people afterward came up to us and said, we picked on him because he was so far ahead. And we really felt like we had to pick him apart because, you know, everybody loves Nathan, and Nathan's just this great golden boy, and we really went after him hard, and people actually admitted that to me. One of the things that I had the biggest problem with was the recycling of mailers bought by Doug Manchester, then you know, they literally were paid for by him, then they were repeated, Lincoln Club mailers, then they got, and GOP mailers, and then they got repeated in the newspaper, and then, you know, addressed, you know, 3, 4, 5 times. They cycled through in that way, and
Sure.
and the way that they marketed it, you know, just the way it was headlined, and it was always the first on the page, and that sort of thing. It's not just the stories themselves, and reporters can be as diligent and unbiased as they possibly can be, and I do believe that most of the reporters at the UT were excellent, and most of the editors were excellent, but then it's the timing of them, it's the marketing of them, and that's what really, to me, was the big difference. I don't know whether it would have changed things. I can't say that.
All right, so how about a grade? And would you split the grade? Is it one grade for the UT and another grade for the rest of the media?
Yes, actually.
All right, let's have it.
I guess I would give the UT a C, accounting for the good work of the reporters who were directly covering the campaign, or some of them, and just the management handling of it and the way I felt that things were marketing. I would give it an F, so I would average it a C. You know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other media?
Most of them, I would say a B+. I thought for the most part, people really tried to dig in to the issues as much as they could. They just kept going back to that narrative, but I mean, people get in ruts. I'm not angry about it.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Sure.
Let's talk to Sara Britt. Sara, as I said, thank you for pulling the microphone toward you. It's the grandmother of Hannah Anderson, the young lady who was rescued by FBI agents when they shot her kidnapper in Idaho. This was obviously a horrible tragedy for your family, and you all were thrown into the media spotlight when the first incident, when the murders happened. First of all, what was it like for you to be in that crush of media that you had never experienced before?
It was terrifying. You know, we're a pretty private family, and to be exposed to the media and on air and around the world, telling a horrific story was pretty rough.
Yeah, you're dealing with your emotions, and then now you're also dealing with having to make sure the words you're saying are what you want out there. So what was the media coverage like to your family in the immediate aftermath of the incident where Mr. DiMaggio murdered 2 people, set the house on fire, took off with your granddaughter?
Well, it's actually 7 months today, and the media were there right away, and just so compassionate. And you know, you always hear bad things about the media. Don't talk to the media because they misconstrue everything, but my husband and I. In our opinion, if it hadn't been for the media initially, my granddaughter wouldn't be alive today.
And why do you say that, Ms. Britt?
Because they kept the story going, they kept information out there, and they were just on the spot 24/7 and camped out in front of our house, and just any information they wanted we provided, and they went with it. And during the course of the week when we were still looking for Hannah, the information came out through the media about DiMaggio's home life and what his father had done to another 16-year-old girl in the past, and we had no idea about that, and so that made the situation much more intense, because if this was DiMaggio's idea of how he was going to follow in his father's footsteps, time was of the essence, and the anniversary of that date from his father was on the 10th, the same day that Hannah was miraculously recovered. So the Amber Alert and the media information, just constant, was an A+. You know, they cried with us. You know, they're just so compassionate. There wasn't a rude person in the pot. But and we made some good friends with the media, and just they made us feel so comfortable and helped us through it initially.
Thank you. Did your opinion of any of the media change in the aftermath of Hannah returning home, when there were those stories about whether she was showing appropriate grief about the deaths of her mother and her brother, and whether there had been some sort of relationship that she had encouraged with Mr. DiMaggio? How did you react? How did you and your husband react to those stories?
Well, we were furious, but in some cases it's understandable because the media wasn't given all the information. There's a lot of information behind the scenes that we know and that the media wasn't privy to, which leads to much speculation. And I can say for my granddaughter, as for myself, the reality didn't hit me until 2.5 months later. And so in that period of time, you kind of go along like you're kind of numb, and you're doing what you usually do, and then it hits you. And it's the same with Hannah. And Hannah is a 16-year-old kid. She couldn't come home to her mother. And she had her friends, and friends do their media, you know, social network. And in some cases it got her in trouble because she wanted to tell her story. You know, she heard these rumors and things out there, you know, that she was part of the plot, and it's so far from the truth. And so for us, it's hard to protect her. You know, how do you stop the media from jumping on the other side of it? You know, there was a self-proclaimed profiler that did write a book based purely on speculation on how Hannah could have been part of the murders. And one of our local channels picked up on that, and that was very disheartening to see that they would, you know, just, okay, this is an exclusive for us, and take this and roll with it. And that was very, very disheartening. And but you know, there's no guidelines, nothing. You know, it's kind of open. And the other thing was the coroner's report, and it's not the media's fault. I would expect that the media would notify the family, or the police department would notify the family when the coroner's report would come out. And it didn't. I mean, we were sitting in our living room listening to the news, and it was crushing.
I can imagine.
And Hannah heard about it at school, and that was really hard. Sorry.
No, that's all right. How is your family doing today, and how is your relationship with the media today?
We have no negativities against them. We love you guys. I mean, like I say, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have our granddaughter.
Thank you.
But I do have one thing to say.
Sure.
And it's, when you ask a question, I mean, there was things that happened with our family, some turmoil, because when the media asks questions, they can ask a two-part question, and they only let you answer one answer. And when you cut and paste splice your media for the news, it comes out totally different than the answers that were given. And you have no recourse to go back and say, but that's not what it was, that's not what we said. And at one point, one of the questions that were asked came back that the answer was, my sister thought that Hannah should have been killed along with her family. And, you know, of course, Hannah heard that, and it caused just big turmoil in our family, and it was so far from the truth. And so it's, when things come out in the press, you don't have an opportunity to go back and recant any of that and clean it up and say, but that's not how it went.
Can't unring the bell.
No.
Yeah. That's a really good lesson as we look out on this audience of a lot of reporters and a lot of students about context, right?
Right.
I mean, as journalists, we were all taught about getting the facts right, and getting context right is so critical. Context and emotion, as well as just the dry facts of the story, getting that right is critical in getting the story right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Matthew Tucker, again, CEO of the North County Transit District. There were stories done by iNewsSource and KPBS when the Sprinter was shut down because of the brake rotor wear. And Mr. Tucker, you took issue with a couple of those stories, and then also with a third story that was about hiring practices at NCTD. Would you give us your assessment of what went on there, please?
Yeah, I think I probably would put it in a larger context. I've been the CEO for North County Transit District for about 5 years. And at the time that I was hired in late 2008, Transit District was facing some significant financial issues with deficits that approached about 80-something million dollars over a 5-year period. The annual operating budget at the agency was under 100 million, so it's pretty significant. And so the organization had gone through lots of pain and pressure from the lack of financial funding. And so you already had that as a context of anxiety for a workforce with the new CEO coming in. When I walked through the door, probably within 90 days, there was an employee website that had been created. And it was from a disaffected group of employees. It wasn't necessarily focused in on me, but they were really worried about what was going to happen as a matter of the activities that I was going to have to take, the board was going to have to take to balance the budget. And that sort of became the platform for my relationship with the media throughout my time at North County Transit District. So I wouldn't say the relationship of issues has just started with the KPBS. It's sort of in a broader context.
With this website,
With
because
the
of this website.
Because of the, well, with the website, because one of the things that was posted on the website actually was a reporter's number and a statement about a reporter saying that he would be very friendly. And his number was placed on the website, and it said, report anything about Matt Tucker to this reporter.
Did you know this person?
I did know the reporter.
You had a prior relationship with him?
No. Keep in mind, I'm a brand new guy.
Okay.
And I'm coming from a background of having worked in Virginia, where Virginians are pretty proud of their government, and we're not accustomed necessarily to having people lob sort of cheap shots out of nowhere for you to respond to. And so it was sort of within that framework that the first story, and I'll tell you, it was a funny story. It's about Santa Train. We run a Santa Train on our coastal commuter rail. An employee walks up to me and says, Mr. Tucker, how many tickets do you want to get for the coastal train? And I said, well, just tell me how many tickets do you guys need me to get to help the train sell out? So the employee says, just get how many you want. That's been the policy for the district. So I go home to my wife and I say, honey, do you guys want to ride the Santa train? We have little kids. Yes. She asked all of the neighbors and the kids. So she comes back, all of the neighborhood. She comes back with about 40-something families that want to ride. Then I come up with the idea, well, I will also buy some tickets for military families. So I bought about 80-something tickets, paid for them, no issue whatsoever with that. Then there was an article, executive director exceeds ticket cap, because the employee who actually asked me about it, informed me about it, was also communicating with the media. So the message was that I bought more tickets than you could buy generally in the public, even though the tickets were available for the public to purchase. So even though I didn't ride the train, the articles ran for three different days of articles that would sort of intimate that I had done something really, really, really bad, when all I did was to buy tickets for my neighbors and donate tickets to military families.
So you thought you got sucker punched?
I got sucker punched, and I didn't really realize the context of it, but it sort of was the context that I could see as, you know, being around 5 years, that when you look at the progression of the articles, most of the articles were generated from employees that were disaffected, either terminated or laid off as a matter of us privatizing a significant portion of the workforce, or we're just not happy campers. And the nature of the reporting has been, in general, that the starting point for the discussion is that we've done something wrong, and the reporter has a deadline 2 days from now, and we're supposed to somehow convince the reporter that the article that he's already written should be modified or changed, or it's not valid. If you look at it in the context of the 2 articles that you referenced from KPBS, and I won't get the title exactly right, but the article title said, NCTD has a war on women over 40, some say. And if you were to actually take a look at the article, you'll see 2 lines. One line is of a group of women perceived to be over 40, and then another line is a group of women perceived to be under 40. And if you look at how it was pictorially done, it was intended to sort of make one think that those folks that were hired that were perceived to be over 40 were replaced by people who were under 40. And if you read the text of the article, the inference is made that somehow I hired everybody under 20 and I never hired anybody over 40. And from my point of view, when I looked at the article on lots of different levels, from an organizational point of view, because you care about your organization reputation, you care about your stakeholders, you care about your customers, and candidly, you care about your own reputation. If you've spent time as a professional paying your own way through school, working hard as you can and doing the right things, and seeing someone to write something that says, some say, well, some say a lot of things. At the end of the day, if one really wanted to look and say that my premise is that you're making a choice, that you're making a decisional choice to hire people who are under 40 versus people over 40, there are ways to answer that question demographically, right? It's an analytical approach that one would take, because I've looked at the journalistic code of ethics that you have, and there's a balancing act. And I think a reasonable expectation that you would balance what someone says versus what their analysis would tell you. And if you're going to start the premise that the person who comes and says something to you is accurate, and the other person on the other part just gets to respond, that you didn't start with a blank sheet of paper, that's the problem. That's what I really see as the problem. It's sort of, the article is already written, the bad guy is already identified, and let's ask him for a sentence so that we can finish our article.
You felt that happened in several cases, and you did something that very few people do. You responded point by point and asked for retractions each time and did not get one. Tell me about your relationship with that particular organization during that period of time in terms of trying to get them to see what you've just told us, to start with a blank sheet of paper and do an analysis to try to prove your point.
We've tried, and I've personally tried to have those communications. I sort of have concluded, and I've had different experiences with newspapers here, some of which have, you know, if you can really get people to focus in on looking at the obvious, factual, quantitative data, most folks sort of move towards that direction. It's not been successful with KPBS. To some degree, I think, you know, if you sort of pull the leg out of one of those chairs, the whole chair starts falling down. And I think that's why they've been very, very reluctant in the face of things that are pretty straightforward to not do a correction. Because if you actually look at it and say, well, based upon that quantitative analysis, some of it's pretty clear. There was one article written that said, I walked in and contracted out three service modes. Well, in fact of the matter, it's easy to see that when I walked in the door that those services were already contracted out. But there was a correction made on an article that's on the web. I think it's about 7 pages at the bottom of the article. But the rest of the other corrections that are associated with were never made.
Now, did you go to other media and try to get them to tell your side of the story? Did you go to the local newspaper, which obviously, of course, is now the only newspaper, but did you speak with North County reporters and maybe television stations and radio stations, trying to get some relief here?
No, we've done some things sort of in response if we've been in a media outlet and someone has asked a question. I think candidly, what I've seen is the other side, is media outlets picking up articles from KPBS and running them. And then when you send that same demand for retraction of newspapers relying upon what KPBS and not independently having vetted the information itself. I mean, one of the things that I would say for the students here, for the profession, is that, you know, we talk a lot about the police code of silence. Within the media, there is clearly a code of silence and clearly, you know, a desire not to call people to task for clear things that fit outside of your journalistic standards.
I wonder if it's as much just the dearth of original reporting in some media outlets. I mean, with staff cuts and the economy and budgets, people tend to pick up things from other people. It's kind of the social media way of doing things. And you don't really, I mean, again, this is another lesson, you don't really confirm something that one of your trusted colleagues has reported. You just retweet it, right?
Correct.
Could be a little bit of that. All right, we're going to go to Laura Fink. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I want to remind everyone that when Ms. Fink is done with her statement, we invite you to ask our panelists questions. There's a mic in the center of the room. And Laura, let's talk about your case. Obviously, this happened before this whole mayoral thing happened with Mr. Filner. It happened in 2005, correct?
That's correct.
You were working on his campaign. You felt you were inappropriately touched by him, harassed, did not get the apology you were seeking, but did not go public because of his position at the time, thinking that that would be extremely detrimental to you and your business.
Well, I wasn't a business at the time, it was my job. So, you know, we're all faced with that choice of, do I continue to keep a roof over my head, or how do I negotiate this? So
right.
It was
So then 2013 happens, and you become one of the people who comes forth and says, yep, it happened to me too. Tell me what the reaction that you got from the media, especially since it had occurred 7 or 8 years before.
My situation, it's a very sensational one, and I'm sure that you all as professionals are used to dealing with these stories that have a certain grisly appeal, and I think that the Filner saga was certainly one of those. I was as prepared as I could be before I decided to come forward. I'm lucky because I have friends that have worked in communications that I could contact as resources, and I had some experience professionally myself. So I feel like I was in a better position than most folks that might have been in my shoes. And but that said, even with all of that preparation, I was certainly not prepared for the media frenzy outside my house. I wasn't prepared to have to go and stay somewhere else that night. I wasn't prepared for the challenges of, I was prepared to be questioned, but I think, and it really was varied, because I think that, the coverage was in some ways incredibly fair, but it varied journalist to journalist and piece to piece, and it was a very long arc of a story, so it was over several months. So I would say that there were some bright spots and there were some challenges. one of the things that I found challenging, and you see this with other folks, but until you experience it yourself, when it's particularly around something where you're a little worried about how you're presenting yourself and what's going to happen on the back end of your completing your story. And some of that is some of the things we're talking about with respect to things being characterized in one way or the other. And I think that happens to me particularly with some of the TV stories. And I would speak to a reporter, and it was important to me to try to be thoughtful as I gave my answers, and it was important to me to try, when at all possible, to be composed. And there were stories where I was described as being outraged, and there were sort of summaries that were presented that I didn't feel reflected either my demeanor or statements in the interview. And so there were those moments. But I do have to say, I don't want this to be entirely critical, because there were a lot of moments and a lot of stories that I followed that I felt were very fair, both to me and to try to put it into context. It's challenging to come forward and be doubted, and to know that you're going to be doubted, and to know that that's part of the process, and particularly as having to recount these things that happened to you that were humiliating, that you don't want to be known for. So that's just, I don't know if that's an inherent challenge, but I'd say my advice would be to be mindful of that. And I did want to point out one other thing with respect to the journalist's treatment of me. It was interesting because I do think there's a gender divide. When I had women reporters covering me, they asked similar questions as the male reporters, but the manner in which they asked them did not put me on the defensive in the same way. So for example, it's an appropriate question to ask me, why didn't you come forward earlier? However, there's a way to ask that question that will generate a comfortable answer and a thorough answer from someone who, you might presume this actually happened to. And then there's an aggressive way to ask that question, to try to put somebody on the defensive and see if you can get an answer out of them that might change. And I don't want to say this is universally true, but I found that the women reporters that covered me were sensitive to that, and the male reporters, not as much. A few more of those questions, sort of curveball questions. Well, did you vote for him? Where do you stand? Are you still a Democrat? These sort of more aggressive questions that I'll leave it to you all to judge whether those are relevant or not. But in particular, that one question, why didn't you come forward earlier? It was distinct to me. There was a distinct difference between the women and the men. So, and it sort of threw into larger relief how we think about who we are and who we present and the impact we have on the people that we're interviewing that are different than us, and thinking about how our presentation really does matter, because it might elicit a different response.
And there was also, did you feel at the beginning that you were the latest bombshell in this feeding frenzy, right? You were the latest bomb dropped in this feeding frenzy. So with every new revelation, I guess the intensity of the story was ratcheted up. And I can't remember, were you the second or third person that came out?
I was the second.
Yeah.
I was the second, and I had contact. When Irene came forward, I did not know she was going to, and I was planning to come forward on that Monday. And she came forward, and it sort of gives you pause as well, and then it makes you think, well, do I still need to come forward? She's carrying the water here. She's made her statement. And one of the reasons I decided to come forward was because I feel very lucky too, circumstantially, because there were so many credible women that came after me. So I don't feel that the spotlight was as harsh as it could have been, because there were so many credible women.
Well, that's a good point.
Putting their stories forward. So,
yeah, when you came forward, did you have a feeling as though, I could be seen as just some opportunist that wants to get in on the fight?
I absolutely felt that way. I absolutely knew that was a risk, and I think there are probably still some people that believe that. But I decided to come forward anyway, mostly because, you look at the women that came after and before, I just thought, more truth is better. I guess that's probably your mantra as well.
Again, questions from the audience. We're happy to take questions.
We want to get F's here.
Pardon me?
We want a grade.
Oh, we want a grade. Okay. Well, Matt, we need a grade from Matt too. But Laura, let's have a grade from you first.
I'm going to give a solid B+ here. I do feel like the reason we didn't tip over into A are some of the things I mentioned, but also the sexual harassment remains a problem, and I think that was one of the shocking things that wasn't followed up on. I mean, we sort of like the sensational story, watching how the mayor responded to all of this was a story, but what about the story of all the other women that this happens to? Because it was frightening that it was to a person, people I talked to, and when you're in this situation, you do recognize how pervasive it is, and we haven't had recognition of that in quite some time, and I feel like it's due. Okay.
Matt, pull the microphone over toward you, give us a grade.
I would give you incomplete.
There's a political
and the reason I say incomplete, because I think this story is not over. I think what's out there in terms of the blogosphere, in terms of some of the articles that KPBS continues to post prominently, are going to be relitigated over time. And the question that I think is going to be out there that could change the grade one way or another, who's going to be courageous enough to go through point by point and look at those stories and ask how did that story or a series of those stories get published. So incomplete is the grade.
Okay, fair enough. While we wait for folks to form their questions, I'll throw a question to the general audience, and all of you may answer this. How has your perception of the media changed since the events that brought you here tonight? Anybody can take that. Sarah, you want to start? I mean, from 2 weeks before all this happened to you to now.
2 weeks prior,
Well,
I watch the news all the time, and you pretty much take the news as at face value, and you see incidences where some of the information that came out was not the truth, and they go back and recant that, and but afterwards you believe everything is going to be just like that. They're going to take your answers, and they're going to not misconstrue it in any way, and pretty much, I mean, during the first week, like I say, A+ to everyone. It was just, they were out there behind us, helping us, all over the country. And afterwards, it just got to be kind of chicken scratching, who could get more on the story and put it out there, and whether it was right or wrong, it still got out there. And
so you look at it quite differently now.
Well, now I can watch the news and I go, well, I wonder if that's totally true. It sounds true, but, and you can't blame the media, and a lot of times they don't get all the information. In this case, they didn't get all the information from the sheriff's department, and so you try to go with your background and figure out, surmise what might have led up to this or that, and so you can't always blame the media for that.
Okay. Somebody else want to take a crack at that question? Laura?
What was the question again?
The question was, how has your experience, and you had a very defining experience, how has that changed your perception of how the media does its work?
I'm viscerally aware of how it impacts people that have a lot to lose. And I think I probably took that more lightly than I do now.
Matt, Rachel, anybody?
Well, you know what, I guess, because I would try to not do a broad brush, because I work with reporters in the media and felt really good about the relationships, even when folks were asking me hard questions. So I guess my perception hasn't changed, because I wouldn't paint everybody with a broad brush. I sort of think there's a different dynamic for the media now in terms of how the business model is set up, how folks are trying to compete, which sort of generates, I think, some of the things that I see that concern me. So it's not necessarily about individuals. I think it's where the business market has brought individuals and with behaviors being incentivized.
Well put. Rach?
So I do media relations as my profession, and one thing that I determined at the end of this, I honestly almost left the profession, is how disappointed I was with so many people that I felt were professional, good journalists, and just 3, 4, 5 people disappointed me so gravely that I was like, I gotta find a new business. That's pretty much says it all. But yeah, and I just don't trust those people anymore. But there's a lot of people that I trust, same as I ever did, and I think it's an individual ethics. Your ethics that you live within your personal life and your professional life are often very, very similar.
Okay.
I've noticed.
Are we still listening? Stephen, a question?
Question for anybody who wants to take it. Knowing what you know now, what would you have done different?
That might be good for Rachel and for Laura right off the bat. Start off with.
First of all, I would have trusted my instincts better when people came at me with something that was obviously wrong, and I'm referring specifically to the 10 News story on whether Nathan Fletcher actually had a job, which was, I knew there was something wrong when they said, we have evidence that he doesn't go to work. And I said, well, what could they possibly have? Because I know the guy works. I know that for a fact. I've been dealing with him for a long time on various matters, and he always worked. So Nathan really wanted to do the interview, and I was like, no, something's wrong here. And the fact is that what they actually had was a database that he never used, ever, and neither did the CEO, and neither did, all these other vice presidents in the company and a lot of executives, because it was an engineer, it was a messaging system for the engineers, that kind of thing where I just knew there's something wrong, and they're filling his quote into a story they've already done and they've already written, and sure enough, it was as if they were in cahoots with the Lincoln Club, because the thing wasn't even published by the time the mailer hit. I mean, it was ridiculous. So trust my instincts more, and make sure just to be very forceful about it, because I did have my instincts. I just wish that I had really pulled Nathan back from that and said, this isn't somebody that you can trust. He's not going to do you right. And I was right.
Okay. Laura?
I think that I would do live TV all the time because you have more control over live TV than you do over anything else. So that's, I know that's not possible, but I think that I would go in armed to know that every situation is going to be different. Because when you do this for a while and you answer a few questions, you have this expectation that it'll be a little bit more of the same, and then you get a curveball and you're shocked. So I think I would have been, particularly at the beginning, a little more prepared for anything.
Okay, good answer. Yes, sir, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Joey Arardi. I work at iNewsSource. My question is for Ms. Fink. Ms. Fink, for those of us who are reporters who happen to be men and who, in my case and perhaps many others, have never been in a position as painful as yours, sexual harassment or feeling our personal space violated that way, you said that many of us didn't treat you necessarily with the respect or with the compassion that you deserve. I'm curious, for those of us who have never been in that painful situation that you were in, what should we keep in mind?
Well, I think I was treated with respect and compassion, but I think that there was an element of, an antagonism going on to elicit an answer, particularly after the original arc of the story had already been told. So it was trying to get a new angle or a new something out of me. So it was poking me for a reaction. And I think one is to not do that, and there probably are female reporters that do that as well. So I don't want to make a hard and fast gender rule here, but it was my experience in this instance. I would say be cognizant anytime you're reporting that you might have a difference or that there might be a gap in your ability to relate, and check yourself and maybe talk to someone who might have that experience or someone that might have that background. So if it's a woman, talk to a woman. If it's someone who is not from your same maybe racial, ethnic, socioeconomic background, talk to them about that. Sort of gave me, I think perspective is really important to know what your own biases and gaps are.
Thank you, Laura.
Hi, I'm Megan Teresa with NBC7. My question is mostly for Sara and Laura. I've been a reporter who's been outside of a house. The editors are saying you have to go there, and you want to be compassionate. You want to make sure that you can tell the story right, and you're going through whatever you're going through. However, we also have a deadline, and we have people who are wanting to get the information out, and if Channel 10 or Channel 8 gets the information and we don't, then we can get in trouble. So I just want to know, because I've been in this situation before, what advice you would have to do it in a compassionate way, to get information in a compassionate way, but still understand that we're dealing with competition and that kind of thing as well.
Sarah, you want to take that first?
Well, I guess would be just take your time in really listening, and I know you have deadlines, and just try to get the information straight on paper, and if there's things that you have doubts about when you go back, I mean, there were incidences where the facts could have been checked very easily and weren't due to the interest of time, I imagine, and so the information came out wrong, and so it's kind of like a snowball effect. What one station says, then the other one picks it up and goes with it, and changes it a little different. And I guess checking your facts, you know, if you are allowed that little bit of time, you know, to go back and make sure of what you're writing about, make a difference.
Laura, you want to take it?
I think that is the ultimate chicken and egg question. Because I will also say that, and I will answer it for the room, because every single news outlet asked me, why'd you go with KPBS? And I'll answer it again. And that is because I knew they wouldn't do that to me. I had confidence that they would not do that to me. Now, I don't know if I had gone with another news outlet, if I would have been treated as fairly, and that may be absolutely true. And it may be that the feeding frenzy is, you know, necessarily comes afterward. But I will say that, and maybe KPBS is in a feeding frenzy right now, I don't know. But I will say that I think that when you develop a reputation and for not doing that and for treating folks fairly, they'll call you back. And I would have, I think, you know, if I could sort of, I don't know how to mastermind the stakeout in front of my house and how to prevent that or what I would have done. But when reporters called me, I called them back. And I called them back in a, you know, in a timely fashion, most of the time. And I was happy to respond to their questions. What I didn't want was B-roll of me going to my house and hiding, and you know, and I certainly wasn't prepared to do 10 additional interviews right at that moment. So I don't know. I would say try the old-fashioned way first.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Paul, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm Paul Kruger at NBC, and I want to ask Rachel about what was your strategy, if anything, to counter what you felt was the unfair coverage in the interview? And that is, did you go to Jeff Light, and did you make it absolutely clear to him that
Yes.
that was unacceptable journalistically, and his role as an editor was to make sure that didn't happen?
My experience with actually calling anybody on anything, and I am very averse to doing that because I myself was a journalist and I know how people can be so sensitive, and I don't think that I think I was very judicious with my complaints. My experience varied. Jeff was a little bit more sensitive, but he was also very much like, sorry, hands tied. When I went to Craig and Jeff and said, I really feel that given that you actually, your publisher funded these mail pieces that you're now writing about, that ought to be disclosed. And it really ought to be disclosed every time that you're writing about these issues that you're actually actively funding. It ought to be disclosed that you know, your publishers, I can't remember the number, but it's something to the effect of $350,000 into this race for one person. And would it hurt to disclose? I mean, journalists are always telling us, oh, it wouldn't hurt to disclose at all. You know, sunlight cures everything. But when it comes to disclosing your own interests, not so much. So yes, I did try, and it was dismissed.
If I could ask a follow-up. In a situation like that, why would you be judicious? What was to be gained by anything other than the most assertive effort to...
Well, I guess my point is, I don't just fly off at the handle and tell people that you're biased and you're this, like a lot of PR people do because bullying often works. and I was never a bully. And I only brought to the attention things that I felt were legitimate concerns. And one time, you know, I said, this is ridiculous that you ran a story saying Fletcher denies no-show job, when we didn't do this, you know? we didn't deny a no-show job. You asked us about it, and we said the mailer was preposterous. And now your marketing on your website is Fletcher denies no-show job, and they did change that headline, but that's the only time that my concerns were considered valid, I guess.
We have time for one more quick one. Real quick.
First of all, thank you so much, Mrs. Brett, for being so gracious to the media. We certainly appreciate it. I think I speak for all of us here. But my question is, you said that because we didn't know everything that happened, the Sheriff's Department didn't give us all the information, that led to some speculation. So what advice do you have for those of us in the media to assuage that, to allay that? Do we keep pounding on the door of the Sheriff's Department and say, give us the information, or do we respect what they're saying and saying, well, she's a victim and let it go? Because it kind of puts us between a rock and a hard place. What's your advice?
I mean, during or after?
After. When we started getting things wrong, and you said that you understood that in part because we didn't have all the information from the Sheriff's Department. So what do we do? Continue to try to get that information or let it go?
I think you let it go because in this case, Hannah being a minor, there was a lot of information that couldn't be relayed. And even though there was a lot of speculation by people afterwards, you know, Bill Gore came out and said she was not culpable in any way. And she was truly a victim and is a victim. And if she was an adult, I would imagine that more information could have been provided. But at the time, you know, currently even, there's not much anyone can say. I mean, it's still a homicide case, even though it's closed. I couldn't even get information.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all so much for being with us. Rachel Laing, Sara Britt, Matt Tucker,